Good morning, it's March 7th, and this is To My Liberal Friends. We need the wealthy to pay their fair share. We need the rich to pay more in taxes. Now, how many of you have heard this type of comment from Democratic politicians and liberal commentators in the media? Over and over, I've listened to this mantra from the left, and they believe if they say it often enough, that enough people will hear it and believe it. They are counting on the knowledge that most of these people have no idea about the facts surrounding the tax code and who really pays taxes. They know that when they say this, there will always be more people making less than those making more. So it stands to reason that those making less will agree that someone making more should pay more in taxes. Today I'd like to look at some of the facts. But before I get into the facts, I want to make a personal comment. In the 2017 tax bill, the current rates were set at the top rate for income was reduced from 39% to just over 37%. I felt this was a mistake by the Republicans. The top rate, whatever percentage you put it on, only affects, for a married couple filing a joint return, taxable income above $693,750. I'm being honest here. How many people in this country have taxable income above that amount, and only the amounts above that number would see a 2% tax increase? It's a marginal increase. By doing this, I felt they gave the Democrats a talking point that they have hammered home repeatedly by saying the tax bill was just a tax cut for the rich. When the bill was first signed, this was what the Democrats said. The liberal media joined in denouncing the bill as a sop to the rich. But after looking at the data when taxes were actually paid, they finally had to change their tune. A survey conducted in early April of 2019 for the New York Times by the online research platform SurveyMonkey found that just 40% of Americans believed they'd received a tax cut under the law. Just 20% were certain they had done so. That's consistent with polls finding that most Americans felt they hadn't gotten a tax cut, that a large minority thought their taxes had risen, even though 1 in 10 households actually got a tax increase. That's all, 1 in 10. Experts are divided on whether the tax law was a good idea, but there is little disagreement on this core point. Most people got a tax cut. The Tax Policy Center estimates that 65% of people paid less under the law and just 6% paid more. The rest of us saw very little changes. Other analysis reached similar conclusions. The Joint Committee on Taxation, Congress's nonpartisan team of tax analysts, found that every income group would see a tax cut on average. So did the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, a left-leaning think tank that was sharply critical of the law. In fact, that group went even further. In the December 2017 analysis, it found that every income group in every state would pay less on average under the law in 2019. So far, tax season seems to be playing out more or less as the expert predicted. H&R Block, the tax preparation giant, said last year that 2/3 of returning customers have paid less tax this year than the year before. Taxes were down on an average in every state. Now back to my original point. Biden will be releasing his budget this week and has once again made the point that he will be proposing a tax increase so that everyone pays their fair share. He loves that term. With that in mind, I thought we should look at who pays what income taxes compared to their actual income. The Internal Revenue Service recently released its income and tax statistics for 2020, and they show the top 1% of earners paid 42.3% of the country's income taxes. That's a 2-decade high in the share of taxes by the 1% of what they pay. They're paying more than they were before. Think about that. 42.3% paid by 1% of the people. That same 1% reported earnings of 22.2% of the adjusted gross income on their tax returns, which means the share of taxes paid by the top 1% as a group is roughly double their share of income. Whatever else you say about the current tax code, there's no denying it's steeply progressive. In a recent analysis by the Tax Foundation of the IRS data for 2020, it gives us some interesting points. The top 5% of earners reported 38% of the total adjusted gross income, but paid 62.7% of all income taxes. The bottom 50% of earners reported 10% of the AGI, but paid only 2.3% of all income taxes. And that's what happens when you have a progressive system. The trend over the past 2 decades is that the income tax burden has been shifting even more to the highest earners. The There are charts out that capture this trend. In 2001, the top 1% contributed 33% of the income tax revenue, 9 points lower than in 2020. The Donald Trump tax reform in 2017 did little to change the trend, despite Democratic claims that it favored the rich. The next income group, those between 1% and 5%, have also been picking up more of the bill, 20.4% in 2020 versus 19% in 2001. Meanwhile, the share of income taxes paid by lower earners has been going down. The bottom 50% of Americans in 2001 provided 4.9% of the revenue. By 2020, it was down to 2.3%. The next income group, those between the top 25% and the bottom 50%, used to contribute 13.5% of income tax. That's fallen to 9.2%. And how about people with earnings between the top 10% and 25%? They've dropped from 17.9% of tax income to 14.8%. That group in 2020 covered people who had adjusted gross incomes up to about $150,000. So this is a story that includes the middle class. Now, before someone points out that they get dinged for payroll taxes that fund Social Security and Medicare, they need to back off that claim, because then you would have to start factoring in the benefits you get from both of those programs. If they were to carefully understand the data on those programs, they would find they are tilted heavily toward lower income people. Medicare is especially true because higher incomes pay the surtax, but everyone gets the same benefit when they get older. The basic truth is that rich really do pay their fair share and finance an enormous portion of the government. Mr. Biden and Democrats want to maintain the illusion that the affluent avoid taxes because their appetite for spending is insatiable. He likes to cherry pick a few items and point that out. Federal revenue last year came in at 19.6% of GDP, a level reached only 3 times before. No matter, Mr. Biden always wants more of your money. The next time you hear a Democrat talking about paying their fair share, ask him how much they are paying. Watch that Democrat stutter and start talking in circles. This has been To My Liberal Friends. I appreciate your listening. If you enjoy the podcast, recommend it to your friends and hit the subscribe button.